was 16. My family had saved up for months to take a vacation on this little island off the coast. It was supposed to be one of those once-in-a-lifetime kind of trips. My parents were so excited, especially since they wanted to give my brothers and me something memorable before we all got older. I've got two younger brothers, Liam, who was 12, and Ethan, who was 7 at the time. The hotel was amazing, like straight out of a postcard. It was small, not one of those massive resorts, and it sat right on the beach. The whole place had this old-fashioned vibe, wooden balconies, creaky floorboards, and no elevators. Our room was on the top floor with a balcony overlooking the ocean. My parents were thrilled, but I could tell they were also counting on me to help keep Liam and Ethan entertained. They didn't say it, but I was the responsible one, so I knew the deal. A couple of days into the trip, my parents told us they were going out for dinner at this fancy restaurant on the other side of the island. It wasn't really kid-friendly, so they left me in charge. I didn't mind. We'd been chilling all day, so I figured it would just be a relaxed night watching TV and eating snacks. After my parents left, we ordered some room service, watched cartoons. By 9 p.m, Liam and Ethan started getting restless. Ethan especially was bouncing off the walls. That's when he came up with the idea to play hide and seek. At first, I said no. It was late and I didn't want them running around and making noise. But then they begged and I finally gave in. I figured it would keep them occupied for a while, and as long as they stayed in the hotel, it would be fine. We decided to play in just our room and the hallway right outside. I was the seeker first, and Liam and Ethan ran off giggling and I started counting. When I finished, it didn't take long to find them. They weren't exactly creative with their hiding spots. Ethan had squeezed under one of the beds and Liam was behind the curtains. For the second round, Ethan begged to be the seeker. I agreed, but I told him the rules again. Stay on our floor. Don't go into any of the other rooms or anywhere else in the hotel. He nodded seriously, like he understood, and started counting. Liam and I hid together behind a big potted plant in the hallway. We were trying not to laugh when we heard Ethan yell, "Ready or not, here I come." A minute passed, then 2. We didn't hear him coming. Liam started whispering, "Do you think he's lost?" I shushed him, but after a while it started to feel like something was off. "Alright, let's go find him," I said, stepping out of our hiding spot. We called Ethan's name, but there was no answer. I checked under the beds, in the closet, and even in the bathroom, but he wasn't in our room. Maybe he's still searching, though he didn't sound convinced. We walked up and down the hallway, checking behind furniture and even knocking on a few doors. Nothing. That's when I started to get nervous. I told Liam to stay in our room in case Ethan came back. I grabbed the room key and went downstairs to the lobby. The place was almost empty, except for the guy at the front desk. I asked him if he'd seen a little boy running around, but he shook his head. I checked the dining area, the lounge, even the pool. No sign of him. By now my heart was racing. Ethan had always been a bit of a wanderer, but he'd never gone this far before. I went back upstairs to our room, hoping Liam had found him, but he was still missing. Liam looked at me with his wide, scared eyes. "What if something happened to him?" he asked. I tried to stay calm. "We'll find him. He can't have gone far." It wasn't until I checked the stairwell that I noticed something. There was a small smear of chocolate on the handrail. Ethan had been eating a candy bar earlier. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. I followed the stairs down to the ground floor, checking each level along the way. When I got to the ground floor, I spotted another smear of chocolate on the glass door leading outside. My stomach dropped. The door was unlocked, and there was a narrow path leading toward the beach. I ran back to the room, grabbed Liam, and told him what I'd found. We didn't have time to wait for my parents to get back, so we decided to go after him ourselves. We grabbed a flashlight from the room and followed the path. The beach was completely dark except for the faint glow of the moon. The waves were loud, crashing against the shore, and the wind made it hard to hear anything else. We shouted Ethan's name over and over, but there was no response. We walked along the beach for what felt like forever, scanning the sand with the flashlight. Just when I was about to lose hope, Liam spotted something up ahead. It was Ethan's candy bar wrapper half buried in the sand. As we kept walking, we saw a figure in the distance. At first I thought it was Ethan, but as we got closer, I realized it was a man. He was sitting on a piece of driftwood, staring out at the water. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have you seen this little boy?" "Have you seen a little boy? He's 7, about this tall." The man turned to look at me and I instantly felt uneasy. He had this strange smile, like he knew something I didn't. "Maybe," he said. "A little boy ran past here not too long ago. He went that way." He pointed toward a rocky outcrop further down the beach. "Thanks," I said quickly, pulling Liam with me. I didn't want to stick around and talk to him any longer than I had to. We hurried down the outcrop, calling Ethan's name. The rocks were slippery and the wind was picking up, making it hard to keep our balance. I was starting to panic. If Ethan had come this way, he could have easily slipped and fallen. "Ethan!" I shouted, my voice cracking. And then finally, I heard it. A faint voice calling back. "Over here!" We followed the sound and found Ethan huddled in a small crevice between the rocks. He was shaking, his face streaked with tears. "I got lost," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I hugged him tightly, feeling a mix of relief and anger. "Why didn't you stay in the hotel? We've been looking everywhere for you." "I heard someone calling me," he said, his eyes wide. "They said they needed help." We didn't ask him any more questions. We just wanted to get back to the hotel as quickly as possible. The beach felt even darker on the way back, and every shadow made me jump. When we passed the spot where the man had been sitting, he was gone. The driftwood was still there, but there was no sign of him. By the time we got back to the hotel, my parents were in the lobby, frantic. I told them everything, but I left out the part about the man on the beach. I didn't want to scare them more than they already were. Ethan was fine physically, but he refused to talk about what had happened that night. To this day, I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but sometimes late at night, I think about the way he smiled at me like he knew we'd be back. This happened about 2 years ago. I was 24 and had just started a new job that had me working long hours. I barely got any time off, so when I finally got a full week of vacation, I decided to treat myself to a solo trip. I wanted to go somewhere peaceful, away from the chaos of the city. I booked a small cabin by the lake in a quiet, lesser-known town. The place was picturesque, surrounded by mountains and dense woods. It seemed like the perfect getaway. The first 2 days were amazing. I spent my mornings kayaking on the lake and my afternoons hiking through the trails nearby. There were a few other cabins scattered around the lake, but they were far apart, so it felt like I had the whole place to myself. I didn't see many people, except for the occasional couple walking their dog or a fisherman on the water. By the third day, I started to notice how quiet it was, almost too quiet. Back home, there was always noise, traffic, people, music. Here, it felt like the world had paused. No birds chirping, no winds rustling the trees. Just silence. It was eerie, but I tried to convince myself that it was what I needed to unwind. That evening, I decided to check out a small diner I'd seen in town when I arrived. It was about a 15-minute drive from my cabin. The diner was almost empty when I got there, just an older couple sitting in a corner and a man at the counter. I took a seat by the window and ordered a burger. As I waited for my food, I noticed the man at the counter looking at me. Not just glancing, but staring. He was probably in his late 40s with a scruffy beard and a trucker cap pulled low over his face. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but every time I looked up, his eyes were locked on me. It wasn't the kind of stare that felt curious. When my food came, I focused on eating, trying to ignore him. After a while, he got up, paid his bill, and left. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But then, as I left the diner and got into my car, I noticed his truck parked a few spaces away. He was sitting inside, engine running, watching me. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was waiting for someone, or maybe he was about to leave. But as I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the main road, I saw his headlights in my rearview mirror. He was following me. The road back to the cabin was long and winding with no streetlights. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But every turn I made, his truck stayed behind me. He wasn't tailgating or driving aggressively, just keeping a steady distance. When I finally reached the dirt road that led to my cabin, I made a split-second decision. Instead of turning, I kept driving past it. I didn't want him to know where I was staying. I drove for another 20 minutes, taking random turns and trying to lose him. Eventually, his headlights disappeared. I waited a few more minutes to make sure he really was gone before turning around and heading back to the cabin. By the time I got there, it was late, and I was exhausted. I locked the doors and windows, double-checked them, and went to bed. The next morning, I tried to brush off what had happened. Maybe the guy wasn't even following me. Maybe I'd overreacted. But as I stepped outside to get some fresh air, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were tire tracks in the dirt road leading up to my cabin. Tracks that hadn't been there the day before. Someone had been there. I spent the day trying to shake off the unease. I went for a hike, hoping the fresh air would clear my head, but I couldn't stop thinking about those tire tracks. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me. When I got back to the cabin in the afternoon, I decided to check around the property. I told myself I was just being thorough, but deep down, I think I already knew something was wrong. Behind the cabin, near the edge of the woods, I found it. A crushed pack of cigarettes lying on the ground. I didn't smoke and I hadn't seen anyone near the cabin. Whoever had left the tracks must have been there. That night I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me jump. I kept imagining someone lurking outside, waiting for me to let my guard down. Around midnight, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch. I grabbed a kitchen knife and sat in the living room, heart pounding, but nothing happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just the wind or an animal and went back to bed. The next morning, I decided to cut my trip short. I packed my things and loaded up the car as quickly as I could. As I was about to leave, I noticed something on the porch. A piece of paper folded in half. My hands were shaking as I picked it up and opened it. Scrawled in messy handwriting were 3 words. "You are not alone." I froze. My first instinct was to call the police, but I didn't even know where to start. That someone left me a creepy note? That I thought I was being followed? I didn't have any proof. I got in my car and started driving. Glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds, I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. A few hours into my drive, I stopped at the gas station to fill up. As I was paying inside, I glanced at the bulletin board by the door. Among the missing pet flyers and ads for local events, there was a notice that caught my eye. It was a photo of a man with a scruffy beard and a trucker cap, the same man from the diner. The notice said he was wanted in connection with several break-ins and an assault in the area. My blood ran cold as I realized how close I'd come to something terrible. But there's the part that still gives me chills. As I was getting back to my car, I noticed a truck parked at the edge of the lot. It was the same truck from the diner, and this time the man wasn't inside. Someone else was, someone I didn't recognize, and they were watching me.